Hey everybody, good to be back. So today I wanted to do a video that a lot of people have been requesting for a very long time that I've never gotten around to. That is recommending the model MacBooks that I would buy if you need to buy a MacBook. Big if. So let's go over the ones that I would recommend. Once I tell you the models I recommend, which are the 13-inch MacBook Air from 2013 and 14. These are machines with an 820-3437 motherboard. The 13-inch A1502 MacBook Pro Retina. These are machines, the model A1502 with an 820-3536 or 820-3476 motherboard, or A1398 15-inch MacBook Pro Retinas from 2013-14. Avoid the one that is iris only. Get the one that has a GPU. You may be surprised at my recommendation there. Those are ones with an 820-3787 board. You may be confused at my recommendation there, but I'm going to explain why. If you want to get the cheapest and lightest machine that you can and you don't mind if the screen doesn't look as good as the other models, get the MacBook Air. If you want a machine that has a considerably upgraded screen for a small amount extra that also just happens to be a little bit thicker, then I would get the MacBook Pro Retina. And if you want to do some sort of video editing or you need the quad-core processor and the additional processing power, then I would get the 15-inch one with the graphics chip. There is a considerable difference, in my opinion, in the screen quality between the Airs and the Retinas. Me personally, if I were to buy a MacBook, which I'm not going to do as long as I am still breathing, would be to get the MacBook Pro Retina because it does have a considerably better quality screen. And if I wasn't doing anything crazy with the machine, I'd probably settle on the 13-inch rather than the 15-inch because with the 15-inch, you're lugging around a lot more. There's a additional chance of it dying because, again, it does have a GPU and, of course, Apple. So I would most likely recommend the A1502 2013-14 if I had a gun to my head and I was not allowed to choose the choice of them shooting me in the head under any circumstances and I had to choose the MacBook because the bullet just wasn't an option. I would probably go with the A1502. The first thing I want to explain is why it is I'm not recommending any modern MacBook Pro. So the modern MacBook Pros have a plethora of design issues. The first one that I've demonstrated in this video is where it will send 52 volts directly to either the LCD mux or straight to the CPU if there is any corrosion in this area or even humidity. Even being in a highly humid environment, you can have this issue because right in the edge of the machine is where they put the LCD connector, the spot where liquid is going to go. And whereas on the Lifeboat connector for data, they've really secured this area so that it's, there's foam and stuff around it so that liquid is not going to get in if it's screwed in. On the display connector, liquid gets in very easily. It is right in the corner of the machine, and even humidity can cause this problem. And what they did is they put the display data line that goes directly to the CPU right next to the backlight power line, which can go up to 52 volts. You got a 52 volt power line right next to a 1.7 to 3 volt data line with no pin in between. Really tiny connector. They've never done this in older machines. This is very bad. So that means at any given moment, you could potentially get 52 volts to the CPU. That is not how you overclock, Tim Cook. Now, the second reason I dislike the newest machines is the keyboards. They are just absolute and utter garbage. They have issues where where the key will stop typing, or it will type, but when you press the button, it'll just keep continuing forever. And Apple is still selling that machine to this day with minor tweaks, but they still have keyboard issues. Apple is still covering them over an extended warranty program. Even the ones they're selling right now are in this extended warranty program. That's how little confidence they have in these keyboards going forward. They are very arrogant, so they're not going to change that design, even though their users are screaming in droves. This is bad keyboard design that is failing at very high rates. The next reason I don't like the newest MacBook Pros is the issue with the flex cable on the screen. So Apple has, again, in 2016, they still have not gotten to a point where they can make a computer that simply opens and closes properly. Every time you open and close this machine, you are stressing a flex cable that is going to fail. I'm not talking about, the normal ribbon to the screen. That's going to break over way more uses than this, or if you're really jostling the thing around. They don't really break very commonly, but this ribbon cable does. It stretches, it tears, it breaks, and then when it does, you have no backlight on your screen. This is an issue that Apple finally addressed and finally admitted to in the newest of models, but I still don't trust those machines because of bad keyboard, and again, the whole 52 volts of the CPU thing. That is, and That is all a big mess. You combine that with soldered on SSDs, T2 chips to where it's going to be difficult to replace parts in it, and above all, they remove the lifeboat connector on the newest models so that you have no access to the SSD inside that machine if it doesn't turn on. So if your last backup was yesterday, you did really important work this morning, you didn't back it up, the machine died, there's no taking the drive out, copying it to another machine, there's no even grabbing data off of that without fixing the board. This is a big douchebag move. It's one thing to have a lifeboat connector on there so that at the very least, even though the SSD is soldered on, you have access to the data if it does fail. Removing that connector means that if the machine dies, you are in the exact same place you would be in if an iPhone died or an Android phone died, except it's a little different because when it comes to cloud backups, when you're in areas like where I am right now, where 20 megabit per second up, you're paying over $400 a month. You're not backing up, live movie recording or large projects to the cloud immediately. It's something you may be able to do over time, but it's just not going to be that immediate. So it has a lot of the downfalls of a phone where the storage is soldered onto it, but it's going to be much more difficult for you to actually get data off of it's much more difficult to back up that data because the files we work on computers are larger than the files that we typically use when we're working on phones. So now, why is it that I don't recommend the 2015 and 16 MacBook Pro, even though that one is not this new USB-C Touch Bar model? Well, that's a great question. So when they changed over to the newer model, there's two issues when they went from the 2013-14 that was stable to the 2015-16 that is not as stable. In the new machine, they actually did something that I thought was kind of smart. So this is the cable that attaches the motherboard to the trackpad. And the trackpad is what deals with turning the keyboard signal into a USB or SPI signal for the CPU. So if the trackpad dies, you get no keyboard and no trackpad. But this cable used to go under the battery. So if you had an issue with this, you would have to remove the battery in order to replace the cable. So they actually did something cool in the 2015-16 model, which they put the cable for the trackpad and keyboard above the battery to make it easy to access. However, this is funny because in the 2013-14 model, that cable never ever failed unless you spilled water on it, whereas in this model, this cable fails for no reason all the time. And this is not a new occurrence. In the A1278s, this was one of the only laptops on Earth that's known to have widespread SATA cable failures. It's very, very common. You could read people on my forums saying that I've replaced this thing 2 or 3 times, the customer keeps coming back. I've sold enough of that cable by now to know that there is a demand for it that just does not exist for virtually any other model of laptop. SATA cables, they don't fail in those numbers. But Apple has had an issue when it comes to creating these flex cables, and it's really strange because this cable doesn't move. This cable is actually adhesed down here. It's not like it's on a hinge where it's going to be moving back and forth. It's plugged into the board here, it's plugged in there, it's adhesed down here. There's really no wear and tear on this cable, but it dies constantly. And when that cable does die, you will not have keyboard or mouse. And you're gonna have to replace it. And it's one of those things where if you're at home, fine, you can buy it somewhere, buy it online, you get it. But if you're on vacation, if you're on a trip for business, you don't want to deal with that lack of reliability. And the speed upgrade that you get going from the 2013-14 to the 15-16 is not that great. The only upgrade that you get from going 2013-14 to 2015-16 is a faster SSD. But that's actually the next reason I'm going to tell you why you shouldn't get the 15-16 model. Now, the other issue with the 13-inch from 2015-16 is that they upped the threshold for when the fan comes on. So when you turn on the 2013-14 model, the fan is spinning. It's spinning at a low RPM. It's virtually inaudible, but it is still spinning. On the 2015 and 16 model, that fan will just not spin. It is a lazy bum, and it will sit there and allow the computer to burn. So it has a CPU that's very similar to the CPU from the prior year. It has the identical thermal design, the exact same fan, the exact same heatsink. They just raise the threshold for when the fan comes on, which means you're going to be seeing more dead CPUs with that model and more overheating issues as a result of Apple deciding we're not going to turn the fan on. That's one of the other reasons I don't like the 2015-16 design of the A1502 Retina over the 2013 and 14 A1502 Retina. Let's talk about why I recommend the A1466 MacBook Air from 2013-14, but I don't recommend the 2015 and 16 MacBook Air. Why? It's almost the same design. The 820-00165 board has very little difference from the 820-3437, besides the fact that it uses quad SPI and it has a tinier JTAG connector. The one thing that is different with those machines is they ship with a newer, upgraded, better SSD. So the SSD that was in the machines from 2013-14, I forget off the top of my head, it was something like around a gigabyte per second read and write, don't quote me on it. And the newer one was around maybe 2 gigabytes read and write per second. Don't quote me on it, but it's considerably faster. My point is the 2015 and 16 Air and Retina SSDs were considerably faster than the year before. However, a lot of them were not very good. This Samsung controller that many of those SSDs use was not very good, and they have a tendency to fail. A very similar controller to the 2015-16 Air and Retina SSDs was also used in a bunch of A1708 computers that had bad SSDs that were actually recalled. So this is one of those interesting things where Apple uses a very similar part in two different machines, but they only recall it in this machine and not in that machine, even though it's virtually the same technology. It's kind of fucked up, but again, Apple Inc. So these machines I don't recommend because you're going to have lower reliability on the SSD. It's not a big difference. It's not a huge difference, but it's enough to change what it is that I would recommend. And that's going to be across the board for the 15-inch model, the 13-inch Retina, and the 13-inch Air. Within those groups, they all use the same SSD. So I would recommend that you get the 2013-14 Air, the 2013-14 Retinas for that reason over the 2015-16s, and I would recommend that entire group as a whole over the touch bar for the bad keyboards, the sending 52 volts to the CPU, the flex gate issues with the display, and the soldered-on SSD. Now, when it comes to the 15-inch one from 2013-14, why am I recommending the one with discrete GPU over the one that is Iris only? Doesn't Apple have all these issues with all these different years that have dying GPUs? Why are you recommending the one with the GPU? Great question. So there's an issue, and only Apple could do something like this, I swear, on the 820-3662 board, where they will randomly crash, and that is actually caused by the CPU vCore just randomly going down on either phase 1 or 3, I forget off the top of my head, but the CPU vCore is going to kind of fluctuate every now and then as they age, and when it fluctuates by too much, it causes the CPU to crash. And what's really interesting to me here is that the 820-3787 board does not appear to have this problem, and the same drove as the 820-3662 board does, even though they have virtually identical CPU vCore circuits. We've typically fixed it by replacing all 3 CPU vCore MOSFETs with a newer version of the chip, but again, why do that when you can just buy the one that doesn't have those issues to begin with? So that's why I recommend if you want a 15-inch one, buy that version rather than buying the Iris only. And the 820-3787 board is actually the one that Eli, the computer guy, has, and he always says, my Apple products just work, my Apple products just work, blah, blah, blah. You hit the lottery and you got the one that doesn't have all these BS issues. That one also gets the Eli, the computer guy, thumbs up as well. You may not know who he is. I've been told that a small number, a very small number, a small percentage, a very small percentage, a limited number of people know who he is. But he suggests them. Now, in terms of why I don't recommend the 2012 model with the Retinas, great question. For the 15-inch 2012 models, you have this recall issue where the buck converter for the GPU will become desoldered from the board. It causes random crashing. On the newer models, they didn't really fix that so much, but they did put bracing so that it has less likelihood of flexing inside the machine by way of these little rubber looking pads, foamy stuff, which they did not have on the 2012 version. So if you get a 15-inch from 2012, not only are you getting a considerably slower SATA SSD and a slower processor, but you're also getting a machine that has a very much higher likelihood of failing. Why don't I recommend the 2012 Retina? Great question. This machine is virtually impossible to get a battery for nowadays. So that machine was produced for a very short period of time, and it also wasn't very popular. Since it was produced for a very short period of time and not very popular, any machine you get in the market is going to have most likely a close to dying battery, and when it comes time to get a new one, you're not going to be able to get one that's high quality. We don't offer battery replacements on that machine because I don't want to sell you shit batteries that are not going to last, or that are knockoff junky crap because I'm trying to save a few bucks, in spite of what certain people on Reddit may think. Now, so that model I do not recommend getting. It's a nightmare to assemble and disassemble, but even from that point of view, it's just you're not going to be able to replace the battery when there's an issue with it. The 2012 Air, it's not necessarily a bad machine. It's just you don't really save much by going for the older 2012 Air, but you do lose a lot in terms of both performance, energy efficiency, and above all, the SSD. 2013 is the year that Apple started using PCI Express SSDs across their entire Air and Retina lineup. That is a considerable speed difference, and also the reliability of the Toshiba SSDs in the 2011 and 12 MacBook Pros is trash. They're almost as bad as an OWC. I don't want to say as bad as an OWC. I don't hate Toshiba that much, and that would just be, I would expect to get sued for slander if I said something that awful by Toshiba, but they're not as bad as an OWC SSD, but they're pretty bad. They have lots of issues. You could spend a little bit more money and get the 2013 model. That model is also considerably more energy efficient and has much better battery life as a result of integrating the platform controller hub into the CPU. So when Intel went from Ivy Bridge to Haswell, in that year, they integrated the CPU, the PCH, into the CPU for all of their -U series processors, and it did result in considerable added battery life and energy savings. 2012 A1278, I don't recommend that because there's not a large amount of savings from getting an A1278 13-inch MacBook Pro from 2012 versus the Retina from 2013. You have to deal with a spinning hard drive. Even if you replace it with a solid-state drive, you're going to have the dead SATA cable. The A1278s are always going to have the SATA cables failing. It doesn't matter if you buy new ones. It doesn't matter if you constantly replacing it. They consistently fail. And also that you have the issue of it having a 1280 by 800 screen. Apple was selling that 2012 model until 2016 with 1280 by 800. My God, awful. So you're not saving much getting that one, but you are losing a lot. Now, many people will say, well, that model has upgradable RAM. I can upgrade the RAM in it. I want the upgradable RAM. And I've always thought that this was a really bad argument for the fact that that machine only goes up to 16 gigabytes. So if you're buying a modern computer where you can go to 32, 64, 128, and you want to get one with RAM slots, that makes sense to me. But if you want to get a MacBook just because it has upgradable RAM, it doesn't matter. You can buy a Retina machine that has 16 gigabytes of RAM. Even though you can upgrade it, that's still the max that you can get with an A1286, A1297, or A1278 anyway. You can't put more than 16 gigabytes of RAM in it. So I don't recommend those models for that reason. The A1286 from 2012 is actually very stable. So if you want a machine that will take your spinning hard drive or your 2.5-inch SSD, let's say you have a MacBook that's a 2009 or 10 or 8 model, and you just want to take the drive out of that and put it into something without having to migrate or do anything, the A1286 from 2012 is what you're looking for. That's with an 820-3330 board. I still don't really recommend going for that because, again, once you get to the 7+ years mark, you're bound to get something that's going to have some serious issues. But you can get that. Now, A1278 for 2011, all those A1278s, again, the hard drive cable issues, blah, not interested. Also 1280 by 800 screen, ew. 2011, 17 and 15-inch, need I say more, graphics chip failures, avoid. 2010, A1278, hard drive cable issues, old crap. But also 2010, you have the A1286s that have the kernel panicking issue, where they will randomly decide to turn off when frame buffer voltage goes below a certain point when C9560 dies. 2009, you have the issue where the display assembly on the A1286s are glued together rather than being one piece of aluminum. If you got a 17-inch from 2009, now you can get a machine where the display assembly is not two pieces of aluminum, but one piece of aluminum so it doesn't fall apart. But you have the issue of the MCP V-core circuit having the tantalum capacitor rather than the normal one. So if you buy the 2009 15-inch, the display assembly will fall apart. If you buy the 17-inch one from 2009, C7771 will die. If you go back to 2008, now we're just getting really long in the tooth, and the 15-inch ones from that year had all sorts of issues with the graphics chips failing, the screen frames coming apart, and the A1278s from that year actually don't have bad hard drive cables, but again, you're never going to find a good battery for it, so don't do it. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I need a newer model. I don't want to buy something, Lewis, from 2013 or 14. I don't want to buy used. I need to know what of the latest models is the one that you recommend. And if you ask me that question, I will tell you to buy a ThinkPad P52. Because there's no way that I can answer that question and give you something that is remotely what you asked for. What do you recommend most? I don't recommend those at all. There's no most, there's no more, they're garbage. You cannot type on those machines without them dying. You can't open and close those machines like a normal laptop without them dying. The SSD is soldered on. There's no port to get the data. The board that the SSD is soldered onto fails. If you have it in a humid room, you risk 52 volts going to your CPU. And overclock that I don't even think you'll see Linus doing. They have ridiculous numbers of issues. These machines have T2 chips inside them, which at a certain point, if Apple chooses to, could lock you out from replacing your own screen or other parts of your own machine. They're trash. There's no way that I can recommend these machines in any way, shape, or form. With old machines, I can say they're not my preference. They're not durable. They're not my preference. They're Apple. But at the very least, here's the ones that have the least design flaws where you can buy it and you can expect that if you don't F it up in any way and you treat it like the snowflake it is, it actually lasts. I cannot say that for any of the new machines. So if you need me to recommend something that is new and modern, ThinkPad P52. One of the Dell business line Latitudes or Precisions or something. But I can't recommend these products because they are just fundamentally trash. So just stop asking me that question. And frankly, at the end of the day, you don't. Why are you buying a Mac? What do you need on a Mac? What can you do on a Mac that you can't do anywhere else? Is it really that important that you're willing to give up your ports, to willing to deal with a soldered on SSD, willing to deal with a machine that you can't open and close, willing to deal with a machine that you can't type on, willing to deal with a machine where the manufacturer tells you to go F yourself because there's humidity in your room? Like, just why are you continuing to buy this? If all of you stop buying this, if every single one of you stop spending money on those products, I got to go find a new job. And I have 12 or 13 employees here that I have to find something else to do with. And I'm still telling you, buy something else. That being said, hopefully this video is helpful. Hopefully this list of the models that I recommend, why I recommend them over others, and why I don't recommend the others has been helpful for you while you are shopping for the machine that you want. No, I do not have those ones for sale online. Half of the time I don't even have MacBooks for sale in the store because I'm here till 1 or 2 in the morning fixing stuff for customers and never paying any attention to the stuff that I'm doing for actual videos. And there's a person outside who's staring at me, and he's not going to stop staring at me until I open the door. This is the part that sucks about having fans. He's trying to open the door. We're closed. It's midnight. It's 1:15 a.m. It's 1:15 a.m., man.
Get the fuck out of my store. We are closed.
Anyway, so I really should have rethought this whole moving the store to the front thing. So that is about it. With any luck, this video has been helpful to you in terms of the products that I do recommend, don't recommend, why I recommend the ones that I recommend, why I don't recommend the ones that I don't recommend, and helps you choose what it is that is the right model for you. At the very least, if you are buying one of these ones that I don't recommend, you know what it is to look out for, you know how to fix it if it fails, or if it does fail, at the very least, you kind of have an idea. You had it coming. So that's it for today, and as always, I hope you learned something.